Today, much of the old Woodhead Line that ran between Manchester and Sheffield is a beautiful recreational trail.
But during its history, it's played host to many alarming and tragic events.
In this video, we're going to take you through one such event which occurred back in 1847, less than 2 years after the line had opened. At 7:30 p.m. on Friday the 11th of November 1847, a train left Manchester bound for Sheffield.
In one of the carriage compartments there were 6 people.
So, the 6 initial characters in this tragic story, we have Samuel Wiltshire, 31 years old. He is an umbrella maker from Sheffield. Secondly, we have his friend Edward Newham, a pearl button manufacturer, also from Sheffield. We have 2 other men in the compartment, both from Manchester. One is called Richard Hall, one is called John Dickinson.
There was also 2 women whose names we don't know.
That's right, and in newspaper reports at the time, although we get to know the names of all the men and some of the occupations, the women remained anonymous in history. So Samuel Wiltshire and Edward Newham had both been in Manchester on business, buying supplies for their craft workshops. Now, the report said that they had freely partaken of ales and liquor during their visit, and had also bought some further, what we say today, booze to enjoy on the journey back from Manchester to Sheffield.
But apparently drink had got the better of Samuel Wiltshire.
That's right, he'd become a little bit rowdy in the compartment. It insulted one of the ladies, and one of the passengers, I think Dickinson, had objected to that. And then as the train moved towards Woodhead Station, just a couple of 100 yards behind us, you might be able to see the old Woodhead tunnels, an argument had broken out between Richard Hall and Samuel Wiltshire. So once the train left Woodhead Station and went through the Woodhead Tunnel, just over 3 miles long, at the time we believe the longest tunnel in the UK, things got a little bit more heated. A scuffle broke out between Richard Hall and Samuel Wiltshire, which involved Hall's watch falling to the floor of the compartment. So the next part of the story occurs when the train arrives at Dunford Bridge Station, the other side of the Woodhead tunnels. So let's go there to find out what happened next.
When the train emerged from Woodhead Tunnel and pulled into Dunford Bridge Station, Richard Hall complained to the guard of the train.
So what happened next was all the other passengers in that particular compartment were moved out. The 2 ladies, Richard Hall, John Dickinson and Edward Newham, who was the companion of Samuel Wiltshire, were transferred to another compartment, and the guard and one of the porters from Dunford Bridge Station locked the intoxicated Samuel Wiltshire in that compartment that he'd already been causing all the bother in.
Ooh.
The idea was to sober Samuel Wiltshire up by the time they got into Sheffield, which may have been another 3/4 of an hour down the line, and then deposit him safely at Sheffield Bridgehouses station. So off the set, down the Woodhead Line in that direction. So about 5 miles further down the track from Dunford Bridge, the train arrived at Penistone Station, which at the time was located just to my right. It had been opened in 1845. The newer Penistone Station wasn't open until 1874. So at this very spot, the guard checked the train. He looked in the carriage where Samuel Wiltshire had been locked, but he couldn't see him. But he just assumed that maybe Wiltshire had slumped on the floor, drunk, was sleeping off his intoxication. So the train left Penistone and carried on in that direction towards Sheffield. However, when the train reached Sheffield Bridgehouses station and the guard went to remove Samuel Wiltshire from the carriage, the compartment was empty. So now a new character enters our story, the superintendent of the Sheffield part of this line, a man named Mr. Hargreaves. He quickly took statements from all the key witnesses and then had an engine loaded with 8 lights at the front so he could go back up the line and see if he could find the missing Samuel Wiltshire. So after what must have been quite a tortuous journey of maybe a couple of hours or more, Hargreaves and the lighted engine was coming up in this direction on the line, past the Bullhouse Bridge and heading up towards Hazelhead.
He was still searching for some clue of what had become of Samuel Wiltshire.
So yeah, so far no sign of Samuel Wiltshire. So we know he was on the train at Dunford Bridge, where the guard and the porter locked him in the carriage. We know he wasn't on the train when it arrived at Sheffield. We're not sure whether he was on the train at Penistone. So we are now about 3 miles from Dunford Bridge. So Hargreaves must have been thinking, am I going to see anything?
Eventually, around this spot, Hargreaves spotted something about 3 feet from the track.
That's right, we're in an area called Bullhouse Wood. It's between the Bullhouse Bridge and Hazelhead Station. And what Hargreaves found was an unpleasant sight. It was the remains of Samuel Wiltshire. So yeah, Hargreaves found the body of Samuel Wiltshire face downwards, head badly cut and bruised, and in the force of him leaving the train, it displaced a little bit of ballast and there was a pool of blood in that hole in the ballast. Now the quick thinking Hargreaves drew a quick sketch of what he'd found because he knew he would be asked to give evidence at a forthcoming coroner's inquest.
So they loaded Wiltshire's body onto the train and took it back down to Penistone.
So we're now going to head back the 2.5 miles towards Penistone and find out what happened in the next part of the story. So Samuel's remains were brought here to the Old Crown in Penistone, where an inquest took place the very next day.
So the job of the inquest was to establish the full facts of the case and then to determine the cause of death.
Yeah, some further facts came out about the deceased Samuel Wiltshire. So as we said, he was 31 years old. He was actually married with a 6-year-old son, and his wife was pregnant with another child, about 5 months pregnant. In the 1841 census, he'd been listed as a tinker. That's somebody who goes around selling things, maybe on street corners, maybe door to door. So that was a little bit more about Samuel Wiltshire. He'd actually progressed in life from being a tinker to being an umbrella manufacturer. So at the time in Sheffield, the umbrella trade was increasing. Just over, well, a couple of miles from where we're sitting now on the old Woodhead Line, was the works of Samuel Fox, who actually established an umbrella making business in Stocksbridge, which then became a massive steelworks.
His friend, Edward Newham, was a pearl button manufacturer.
He'd been born in Birmingham, which was one of the centres of pearl button manufacturing. They were decorative buttons that the well-to-do would wear on their clothes, so both skilled craftsmen.
So it was clear from Hargreaves' testimony that Wiltshire had opened the window and left the train.
That's right. Now, 1847, this line had been open just over 2 years. We don't know if Wiltshire had been on the railway before. We don't know if he thought that a train travelling at maybe 20, 30 miles an hour, 40, it was just safe to get out because he'd just fall to the ground and be able to take out his anger on the world. Who knows what was going through his head at that time? Maybe Wiltshire thought he could get out the carriage and maybe get and vent his anger at Richard Hall or the people he had a beef with on that particular train journey.
But the important thing the coroner had to find out was it down to drink?
That's right, because it turns out that Samuel Wiltshire had some burial insurances. So what used to happen back then, a lot of working people with a little bit of excess cash and a bit of responsibility, which tells us something else about Samuel Wiltshire, used to pay into an insurance scheme where if they died, the scheme would pay for a decent burial, because there was an absolute fear and dread at that time of being buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. So if it was found he'd been intoxicated, acting irresponsibly when he died, the insurance scheme wouldn't pay out. Unfortunately for Wiltshire's widow, remember 5 months pregnant, it was found that death was down to reckless behaviour and intoxication. So one consequence of this coroner's inquest was, if we dive forward to the 1851 census, she is listed as a pauper. 2 children, no money, down to the reckless, drunken behaviour of her husband that night.
Yes, but there was a further twist, wasn't there, John?
That's right, and this involved Wiltshire's friend, Edward Newham. Now, Richard Hall, the guy that had the scuffle with Wiltshire on the train coming through the Woodhead Tunnel, alleged that the morning of the inquest he'd been visited by Edward Newham and been offered money not to go to the inquest and testify. It was thought that Newham was hoping that it wouldn't be found that Wiltshire had been drunk, and therefore the widow would get the payout. So this was alleged during the inquest. Now, interestingly, in the newspaper the week after, Newham had actually taken out a notice in one of the columns to say he totally refuted that allegation. Now, it also turns out that Hall and Dickinson, the two men from Manchester on the train who were testifying that Wiltshire was drunk and aggressive, actually turned up to that inquest, which was held in a pub, drunk themselves. So I think in the mess of he said, they said, whatever, no charges were pursued against Newham. The records say he carried on with his work in Sheffield and died in, I think, 1871 and was buried in the city's general cemetery.
Yes, so the loser in this case was the poor widow.
That's right. I mean, the records say that she did remarry, set up a new life in Macclesfield in Cheshire, married to a fruit trader. She herself kept lodgings, so it seems that...
She made good.
Yeah, well, it seems that her life turned out okay in the end. So there we go, a tale of drunkenness on the railways, a tale of possible bribery, a tale of pauperism, a tale of danger. But the one man who emerged with great credit from this was Hargreaves, the railway superintendent. You can find plenty of reports of him investigating other mishaps and accidents on what became the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway for the next couple of decades.
So, watch out for future episodes.
Yeah, plenty more content coming up like this, where we uncover some of the stories behind this famous old railway line, as well as looking at some of the infrastructure that's still in place. So if you like this sort of content, please subscribe to the channel. And if you've liked this video, please give it a like. It does help with the algorithms as we seek to grow as a new history-based channel on YouTube.
So join us next time where every journey begins with a path to the past.